Hey y'all, it's Mary Hyatt, and I'm so excited you're here for this month's topic, which is all about money. But before we hop into today's episode, I gotta ask, when was the last time you thought about your relationship to money? Not just paying your bills and getting out of debt, but like your actual relationship to it. This month, as we explore this idea, I'm going to help you find more peace and ease when you think about money, when you make money, and when you give money away. I'm confident that after the next several episodes, you'll have a new money consciousness that will leave you feeling truly abundant. So heck, let's get into it.
Welcome to the Living Fully Alive podcast with Mary Hyatt, here to help you find your authentic voice, learn how to love yourself, and embrace your life. And now, your host, life and mindset coach, body love advocate, and doTERRA Presidential Diamond, Mary Hyatt.
Hey everybody, it is Mary, and I am hanging out with my dear co-host, Lindsley Brooks. How you doing, girl?
Hello, I'm good.
Girl, this has been a tough entry point into this conversation.
To this topic. And it also feels like we haven't sat across from each other doing this in a minute.
It's been a while.
I know. Maybe it's all this holiday stuff.
Maybe that's kind of what we're dealing with. It's like, oh, let's get back into the rhythm.
Yes.
Because I did my episode by myself last week, and I think I did one by myself the week before. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
Well, we started chatting about money because obviously you guys know this month we're talking all about money. And I think what's beautiful about this is that anytime you start doing something where you're going to teach, inevitably your stuff comes up.
You start living it.
You got to wrestle with your own issues that are coming up. And y'all know last week we had the first episode of this month's topic of money, and I was by myself and I was talking about the root to all of our money problems. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to it. I think I got more feedback from that episode on social media. People were like, mic drop, mind blown. I mean, it was, I think, a real aha for a lot of people, because what I basically taught last week was how our relationship to money is just a giant mirror to our relationship to ourselves. And anything that we have attached to money, fear, anxiety, stress, overwhelm, we don't have enough of it, is really how we feel generically about life. It's kind of like a tool to reveal how we feel in different areas, in relationships, in our business, with our body. And money is just one of those ways that we get to see how we approach life. And it's pretty telling and pretty, I don't know if humbling's the right word, but it's like, woo. I mean,
well, and when we were talking yesterday, I was like, this is going to be really interesting because I have gotten so stirred, like, studying this and really doing our own work around it, and being in this conversation is almost like a meditative practice in itself. And I was telling you, I was like, man, I'm like totally stirred. I'm like so in it that who knows what's going to come up when we actually talk together today.
Guys, hold on to your hats.
We might have a coaching session going on. We're not sure yet.
No, well, I'm excited because we are going to talk about money mindset and share a little bit of our stories and our journey through coming from a place of scarcity into a place of abundance when we think about money. And it's interesting, you and I have this in common, where we were both married and we had husbands, at least who contributed it, if not fully provided financially for us. And I'll just speak for myself for a second, but I know that for me, towards the end of my marriage, about probably the last 3 years of my marriage, I ended up becoming the quote unquote breadwinner.
Mm-hmm.
So it shifted. So the first 6 or 7 years of my marriage, my ex-husband took care of me financially, and he had his own business and was doing all of that. And it was interesting because as I started to make money doing my doTERRA essential oil business, and he decided that he wasn't in love with what he was doing anymore and quit his job, all of a sudden I had to address all of my money issues because it was about my earning potential. It was about what I could create. And then when you get divorced, man, oh man, are you just thrown in the deep end and have to figure out all this shit by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of your money stuff comes up, I feel like. And oftentimes in relationships, I find that is where you get a lot of mirroring happening because there's just a lot of just junk around it. And sometimes it, is being in a relationship or, moving out of one relationship into a different kind of form of that relationship that causes you to have to look at it. And yeah.
Well, and you know what they say? I mean, statistically, they say that, money is sometimes the number one cause for divorce.
Yeah.
And if you think about all the money arguments and the money conversations, it really does. That's kind of like the whole Dave Ramsey world, right? It's like it really is. It brings all your stuff to the surface. And if you don't have the tools or the language or somebody helping you hold that space, it can shut you down or rip you apart, or it can be the thing that brings you together,
Yeah.
And for my case, we were both entrepreneurs, both self-employed. So I always called it feast or famine.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just, like, us trying to do a budget back in the day, even to this day, I'm like, dear God, I know it's like, we'll talk about all this stuff I know today, but just that element of all the things you're supposed to do and all those, like, those shoulds or have tos. And if you feel like you don't have the right mindset or tools around it, it can just set you up to feel like a big old loser.
Well, okay. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was just about to say there's nothing that makes you feel, and I'll just say this for myself, when I was dealing with my money stuff, there's nothing that made me feel more stupid than a conversation around money.
Yeah.
And I can remember in my relationship with my ex-husband, I was sort of given the message that I was not good with money. And I handed over the role, even though I actually think I was pretty great with money. And I came into the marriage, I had no debt. I came into the marriage making money. And as I went through that, I got that messaging, hey, you're not good with money, even though I was the one budgeting, I was the one doing that. And so I just kind of gladly handed it over. Like, okay, great. You can do this. You can pay the bills. You can run your business, and I'll kind of sit on the sidelines, and you got that handled. I won't even touch it. And I remember, like, fast forward, I was basically in complete denial. And I really took his lead. I sort of gave my power away and just sort of said, like he didn't want to do a budget. And so we never did a budget. And I remember our accountant always kept coming to us. He's like, you guys have got to do a budget, because we were really broke. I mean, we were struggling. And he was like, you've got to do a budget. You got to do a budget. And my ex-husband felt like that was so constricting, and we just didn't. So we just never did. And so I never knew what we were spending. I mean, when I say I had no clue what our money was doing, I had no clue what our money was doing. And honestly, I was not ever really invited or given the opportunity to see if that would be something that I would be interested in. But I was sort of developed this belief that I was dumb when it came to money. I didn't understand it. I was just a silly girl who didn't get it. And when I started making money, I didn't even manage my money when I started making money. I just deferred that to him. And so then I remember, this was so poignant. I was working with a coach. I'd hired a coach, and she said, Mary, how much money do you make? And I thought, okay, well, let me, pull up my little thing on my computer, and let's look, and not my bank account, but like my doTERRA account. So I knew how much I was pulling in from that. And then she said, okay, do you know where that money is going? And I remember just thinking, like, that was a revolutionary concept to be asked that question. Like, well, I mean, we're living off of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, paying bills or doing whatever.
Right.
But I really didn't know. No.
Yeah.
And she said, if you were going to move ahead in your business, you got to, like, start looking at your bank account. And she asked me to open up my bank account, and she wanted me to look at it every day, and all of my credit cards and everything else that was going on. When I say I was terrified, it was like the skeletons in the closet. If I just didn't know, it was going to be okay. And man, it was like, okay. I remember being like terrified and feeling like I am not adequate to do this job. Like, I'm so dumb when it comes to money.
It's like turning on the lights after you've been at a place with dark lights and you see how dirty everything is.
Man.
I know. And it really does. It stirs up everything. And I mean, it's this connection to, like, I don't know about you, but anytime up until recently, when I've talked about money, I can feel this, like, foggy film sometimes just kind of comes. It's like, I don't want to deal with this right now. Or like when you're saying you're opening up your checking account, it's like, that initial response, I can remember back in the day, it would feel like it would almost make my stomach hurt, or I'd feel nauseated. It just, like, the cringing of watching the bills come in and just, like, hoping that he would deal with it, or that and then finding out that he's not doing it either. So,
well, yeah. And like you said at the beginning, if you don't know how to communicate about it, you're sort of hoping that it's taking care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this fear around money that somehow it's like the thing you can't speak about, you can't talk about, because I think we all carry shame around it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so tricky, is because we have this shame about the money and our relationship to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, don't expose me.
That's right.
If we talk about it, I'm going to be exposed.
Well, and that's what I know you mentioned this last time, but this idea around money, sex, and politics, right? It's like everybody tries to avoid these, and it's almost rude. We have some kind of societal thing that says it's rude to talk about these things. And yet the only way you can really talk, and I think the reason why it's so weird to talk about it is because you can only talk about it if you're doing it intimately or sharing some level of vulnerability, because everybody's got some shadow aspect of all three of those. And money for sure, because it exposes all of your own insecurities, your own worth and value issues. All the lack is like usually the loudest part of that conversation.
Okay, so this is really interesting what you said, that the reason we can't talk about it is because in order to talk about it, we have to have some level of willingness to be vulnerable. I just want to let that hang for a second.
Just sit in that for a minute.
Hey y'all, I just wanted to interrupt this episode real quick to remind you to subscribe to this podcast. I know that emails get lost in your spam folder, so subscribing means my episodes come right to your phone. So go ahead, hit that quick little subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of the Living Fully Alive episodes. Plus, in addition to subscribing to the podcast, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. I don't know if you know this, but I have been releasing guided meditations every Monday over on YouTube, and you're not going to hear them here. So if you've been wanting to start an easy meditation practice, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you don't miss out on my short 15-minute guided meditations. All right, now back to this week's episode. But I think that's so true, and the same as for sex.
Yeah.
I don't, maybe politics, not
maybe
so
not
much.
Yeah, back in the day, maybe.
Yeah, but I think that's certainly sex. But if you think about it, it's like if you aren't willing to feel that shadow, and I want you to explain the shadow, because I think that's something that you and I talk a lot about, but maybe it's a kind of new concept. So can you sort of just explain, when you say shadow, just kind of explain to everybody what you mean when you say that?
The parts of yourself that you haven't really looked at. And so I'll just use an example. It's like, I have never really resonated with this idea that like money is the root of all evil. I've never really felt like a lot of these beliefs that are out there that like, if you have money, you can't be spiritual. Some of these kind of concepts, like I've actually never really resonated with any of that. So therefore I thought, oh, I don't have any money issues. And I've thought, I don't really have any blocks around money. And yet I do. I think we all do. I really do. I think that's just part of our conditioning. And even more so realizing it as we've been diving in this last month, I'm noticing beliefs and parts of myself that have been in my subconscious that I would call my shadow, the parts of me that have been shaming me, or conversations that I've been having internally about how I handle money, my worth and value connected to making money. And I would say that would be my shadow side. And it's the shadow meaning that like, it's not bad. It's just not in my awareness until it has to be. And usually we don't really see the shadowy parts of ourselves until they get exposed or triggered by something either outside of us or something catalytic that happens in your life, like a divorce or bankruptcy, or your body gets sick, because you can manifest all these things even around money.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I don't know if that answers the question.
That's super helpful. And I think that what I like about what you said is you don't usually have to deal with this until there is some kind of trigger that happens. And I think that's one of the reasons it's hard to talk about money, because usually when we get to the state where we have no choice, it's because there has been this sort of like poking, prodding, crisis situation where it's like, we can't pay our bills and we have to talk about it because it's the end of the month and it's not coming out even. And so typically it's these high stress situations that are really, really triggering. And so there's a lot of stress associated with it. And depending on our upbringing, depending on what we've seen modeled, there's, I have yet to meet somebody who has had a really healthy experience growing up surrounding money, like they're what they've been learning from their parents surrounding money. And there's all different kinds of ways that we eventually come up with our money mindset that make it what it is. And so let's rewind the clock for a second, because I think it starts with the messages we receive as children around money. And again, what's so interesting is because money isn't usually talked about, these are really subtle communications that are given to us by parents, by teachers, by society. And I think even our generation, so much has changed. Like, I think children who are born today will have a different money mindset and consciousness than we grew up with. And so let's talk about that. Let's rewind. I think this is important for everybody listening, thinking about what were some of those family unit, childhood systems, things that were communicated to us about money. So I'm curious for you, and this is just to know what it was like for you. Can you remember certain things that were either said about money or implied about money growing up?
Yes. And this is where it gets kind of weird, because I noticed even as you're asking me that, I'm like, ooh, my heart starts racing. I get adrenaline, because I was raised in a very privileged family. And this sounds like, oh, poor you, but it's, I got made fun of for that. And with it being my last name, so my maiden name was Richie. So you can just imagine, it was like, oh, Richie Rich. And, just all those kinds of conversations where it was more of a, it felt very kind of shaming to me. And I was embarrassed a lot of the time because I didn't necessarily always fit in. And I noticed that we never talked about money in my household. Like, my parents, they are very generous and very abundant. And so there was a lot of giving, but it was never like, how can we acquire more and live really lavishly? So I can remember that I didn't even know that we had money until I was like maybe in my teenage years, that was something that was to be pointed out. And so I think growing up, it was more of just kind of like, oh, I have an abundant mindset, because thank God I came from a family that has an abundant mindset and that they're generous. And then you start learning we'll get into this a little bit more. But then I started learning how even in that, there's beliefs that I started internalizing about myself and it not being my money. It became this thing of like, this is their money and
your family's money.
Yeah. And that idea of like, oh my gosh, could I even be able to provide for myself? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It started triggering, I noticed, but I've always been so grateful that both of my parents have been very generous around it and have helped so many people. And yet they've got their own stuff around it too, right? Like, there's an element of, we all have our shadows, but like just manipulation, trying to control, right? That you can use whatever tactic you got. And it's the same kind of core issues, just different sides of the coin.
Right. So it's really interesting that, with you growing up in a financially secure family, that got interpreted as, let's dim that light a little bit. Because if you shine too bright, this is what I'm hearing. If you shine too bright, people are going to take notice because you're different.
Yep.
And they're not going to like it.
Yep.
And so I bet unconsciously, it's like a little girl would just want to feel like everybody else.
Yeah. I can remember there was even one particular time there was some article in the news about my dad, and I had a friend say, do you know that they published how much your dad is worth or something like that? And I was horrified. And I remember like, why didn't anybody tell us, and I'm in my teen, I'm like, I felt a little bit like we were just exposed or something. And this sounds so like, oh, wow, poor you, Lindsley.
But what, here's so funny. You even saying that right now just shows you how much this is still an issue for you.
Oh, that's why I told you. I was like, girl, my heart's already racing. The adrenaline is pumping. I can feel this.
Because it's like, I'm just like pausing here. I know we can do this because it's us. But just to like show that like you're making excuses.
Minimizing.
Oh, yeah, poor Lindsley. It's like you're still in that mindset of like, I have to apologize.
Yes.
Because clearly this isn't really a big issue.
First world problems. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And isn't it interesting like that judgment is still carried over?
Gosh. And we've had many beautiful conversations about just privilege, like, white privilege shame, money privilege shame. Like I have had to work through that a lot this last year because there's some internalized conversation that I think as a culture, we're all starting to have to look at, because there are now people who are very wanting to be more driven and be more ambitious. And the only way you can really succeed in life or deal with your shadows or do this spiritual work is to look at all these parts of yourself. So if you're being conscious, it's going to come up. But
it's just fascinating to see, because for me, I had a very different upbringing. So those of you who know me, I have 4 sisters. My dad's an entrepreneur, and growing up, it was feast or famine, except that feast was just getting by. It was like mostly famine. And sometimes we had enough to, splurge on some fruit roll-ups at Costco. But I can remember being sent to school with popcorn. I can remember people giving us money for clothes. I can remember people dropping food off at our house. And it was tight, to say the least, because my dad was on the verge of bankruptcy on multiple occasions. And he's candid and honest about that. And as an entrepreneur, it's like you try one thing and then it doesn't work, and then you try something else and you didn't work. But in his case, he had an entire large family to take care of. And so we ate a lot of spaghetti, a lot of, pancakes, and, whatever. We ground our own flour. I can remember getting the wheat, because it was obviously cheaper. And so we had to grind our own flour, and just such an interesting upbringing. And there was a lot of stress around money. There was definitely a vibe that there was not enough. It was like, can we get this? And we were never allowed to, school book fairs. We could never buy anything. School was super stressful. We went to a public school in elementary school, and we never had money for school supplies. And so we had to always borrow money from the school to get school supplies. And every year I remember getting so excited because school supplies back in the day, it was super exciting, all your little erasers and everything. And, you'd get the school list of everything that you needed, this many notebooks and this many pens or whatever. But I remember we always had to borrow money against the school because we didn't have it. And all my friends, I lived in a very wealthy county in Tennessee. And so all of my friends were very wealthy. So I was the oddball out, the kid with, a million siblings. And I was not the cool kid. I was the poor kid. And it wasn't until I met my friend, Jenny Beth Snyder.
Aww.
Wherever you are,
Wherever
girl.
You are, Jenny
hey,
Beth.
girl. And she always got to shop at Limited Too. And so I would go over to her house, and she was only one of 2 kids. Her family was really wealthy. And she would give me her old clothes.
Oh.
And so I'd go over and she'd get all these new clothes. I mean, all the time. So it wasn't even like they were really old clothes. They were practically new, but she had so many that I'd come over and I'd basically shop her closet. And she'd give me these clothes. And it was because of her that people even talked to me. Because my clothes were not cool. My shoes were not cool. I was not a popular kid until I met Jenny Beth. And, and so that was the thing. It was I internalized to be accepted, to be loved, to be in the in circle, to be cool, you got to have money. And people won't accept you, and you'll be the odd man out if you don't have money. And for me, coming from a lot of neglect and wanting to be seen, man, unconsciously it was how can I get money? So I was an entrepreneur, man. I was working 2 jobs in high school. I was killing it because I subconsciously was this is how I'll be accepted.
Yeah. And it's probably been a huge, beautiful driving force for how you have become so successful.
Oh yeah. And it's only now in my health that I get to question all of these things, and those pairings, those links between money and acceptance, and going, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I've linked those in my brain. This money mindset says A plus B equals C, but it doesn't have to. And it's kind of a chain. And I feel really imprisoned by that. In order to be accepted, I have to make money. Oh my gosh.
I know.
It's that, and I've seen that play out in my life, in my adult life, in order to get love, I have to give money. I mean, you can probably laugh as I'm saying this because you know, like all the scenarios where this plays out, whether it's in relationships, whether it was in my divorce, what do you call that? Like the
decree
or whatever, like, you know, all of that. I mean, it was just like, all right, as long as I give somebody money, I'll be loved and accepted.
Oh God, I know. Yeah. And then that's it. It's like, even though we have two different childhood stories, isn't it interesting that the same core story is worth and value? Like mine is, I mean, and I've really noticed this as I've tried to really show up in my career and pursue as an independent contractor and entrepreneur. It's like, I have to come up against the thought, can I actually provide for myself? Because up until the last, years or so, even the jobs, I would always get like side jobs and same as you in high school. I was like always working. I loved having money in my checking account because it was fun. Like I just loved having money and make me feel like I was a little independent thing. And yet I also knew that if I didn't have money, I was going to be okay. So it was never out of survival, Right. And so as I've gotten older and really hitting those moments when you only have $30-something in your checking account and you're not able to pay that bill, it's like, oh shit, am I coming up against my own ability to be able to really pull from within myself and to like afford this life that I want and to make enough money so that I'm not calling mom and daddy, It's like that, it has really pushed every button to say, can I do this without them? Can I do this without the Prince Charming or that upper hand that we, this is why people stay in jobs that they hate forever because it keeps paying them a salary because they don't know if they can really believe that they can do it on their own,
Well, and I think that this is a really great segue into something that Kyle Cease talks about in his book, The Illusion of Money. I had to just look down at it. I'm like, well, let's see what it is. It's sitting on the table here next to me. But one of the things that he talks about is you have to make peace with being broke before you can be wealthy.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like you have to make peace with death before you can really live. And I think that there's something really powerful. Most of us avoid that conversation of being broke at all costs. We talk a lot about making money, but we're really afraid to look at this idea of what if it just didn't work out? What if I don't have what it takes? Yep. What if the other shoe drops? What if I literally go bankrupt? What if I have to move back home? All these sort of worst case scenario things that we are terrified to talk about. And this concept of being broke. And we have attached a lot of meaning and judgment to being broke, that there is a personal element here, a shaming invitation when we think about being broke. And of course that's uncomfortable. Of course we don't want to think about that because inevitably we're going to start criticizing and judging ourselves when we think about going broke. Why didn't you try harder? Why didn't you get it together? Why didn't you learn more? Why didn't you get that out there and sell more things? But I really believe after reading this book by Kyle Cease and just doing my own work through the past several years around this, it's like until we can really look at our beliefs that money is tied to our security, money is tied to our worth. What would happen if we were to go broke? And if we can actually realize that there's no such thing as broke, that really is an illusion. Like being broke or being rich, metaphorically, has nothing to do with your bank account. It's like if you really think about people who are abundantly mindset, who are quote unquote broke, but are happy and fulfilled and just living a beautiful life. And then you think about people who are insanely rich, who have all the money, want for nothing, who are miserable and still terrified of losing that money. It's like you'll never find that freedom until you can make peace with being broke, in the same way that you can never fully live until you have come face to face with death. And I think that if we can give ourselves permission to stop avoiding or being in denial about this concept of being broke, when we can make peace with that, it's like all of a sudden we can live in the present and find the abundance that is available right here, right now.
So then that bears the question, what is the deciding factor on, because you think about people who win the lottery.
Yeah.
Right. And they get $1 million overnight and it is gone within weeks or months or however long, or then they go bankrupt. So what is that thing?
Well, I think with that, it comes down to your idea of what is acceptable, of how much money you can make. So it's like a temperature gauge. So for example, I leave my house at 70 degrees. If you were to come into my house overnight and turn the air up to, or the heat up to 74, and I came home, I didn't know you changed it, I would feel hot, right? Like, I'm like, oh, I don't like this. And so I'm going to turn it back down, you know, or for example, if it goes down to 65 degrees, I'm going to feel like that's cool. There's like this temperature that feels comfortable for me. And I think that's the same for our ability of what we believe we are worth and what we believe we can make. I promise you, what you make today is what you believe you are worthy to make. So if you make 50 grand, you believe that's all you're worth. If you make $200,000 a year, that's what you believe you're worth. If you make millions of dollars, that's what you believe you're worth. So people who win the lottery haven't upgraded to the 74 degree temperature. They're sticking it at 70. They're making 30 grand a year, and all of a sudden you hand them $1 million.
Yep.
They're going to do subconsciously, they don't deserve that money. So they're going to do everything in their power to come back to a comfortable temperature at 70 degrees where they feel comfortable, and they will self-sabotage to come back to what feels okay, normalizing it, what feels familiar to them. And we do that with money all the time. It's like people who you look at what they do and you think, why aren't you charging more?
Mm-hmm.
Like you what you're doing is worth so much more than you're charging. And they're like way undervaluing themselves, way undercharging. And it's like, oh, that's a money mindset. That's a money belief that they think they're not worth anything than that. And we will self-sabotage on either side of the coin to go up or to go down, depending on what we think we're worth. And that is never more evident than money.
Yeah. And, you know, this is reminding me of, there's like, we both love the recovery 12-step world. And there's a beautiful support group called Under Earners Anonymous.
Oh, awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And for anybody that's interested, just Google that. But it's like people who have these amazing degrees or certifications. And I'll just be as candid as this is part of my struggle, right? Like, it's like I have all these degrees and certifications and experience, and yet charging what I'm worth. Oh my gosh, every single time I do it, and I do it afraid. And then it gets a little easier and a little easier. And of course I feel comfortable where I'm right now, but I know you've even been on my ass before about, you know, step up your game. And because you face every messaging and programming and insecurity. And then some people don't have any trouble doing that, but they can't do intimacy well. Or so, you know, it's like, you're always going to have some aspect that you're going to, you know, want to develop. But that under earners thing, in that belief that you don't deserve the money and that it will just go right through you just as quickly as it came to you. Mm-hmm. You may be able to attract it. You may be able to generate it. But if you're not conscious about it and you don't do your work around it, it will just leave you as fast as it came.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so interesting. What I've noticed too sometimes is even I have some clients that I'm working with currently, who they came to me specifically to work on money because they actually make a lot of money, but they're still living paycheck to paycheck.
Yes.
I mean, like they're making more than most people, you know, average income. I mean, they're doing great. And yet they are still living paycheck to paycheck. And it's like, okay, where is this disconnect? It's not a problem attracting money. Mm-mm. They obviously like can get the money, but it's like that deservability, that valuing that's going on behind the scenes that they are self-sabotaging to come back down to old programming, which is to be in a state of lack, to be in a state of scarcity, to never have enough. You know, all their beliefs around people who have money, who are wealthy, the judgments that they have on those people. They don't want to be those, quote unquote, those people. They want to be normal, everyday people that don't kind of like almost like go unnoticed.
Right.
And so they've got a lot of judgments around people who have money. So they, of course, are going to not have money, even though they're actually making a lot of money. And so it's just, you know, I'm just thinking about everybody listening. Everybody's going to have their own version of this.
Yeah.
Their own story about this. Ways that we hold ourselves back from making money. Ways we hold ourselves back from feeling safe and secure no matter what kind of financial situation we find ourselves in. And there's a lot of judgments. And this is like what we said, it starts from childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So we get these messages. Lindsley shared her story. I shared my story. And then as we go along in our life, we start adopting other beliefs, whether fed to us from other people. And I want you to start noticing, this is kind of like a practical thing, start noticing what your friends say about money. Start noticing what your peers, if they're talking about it, or if it comes out usually as a slide comment, because it's like we said, we're not candidly talking about it, but it might come out about tipping a waitress or a server. It might come out about, oh, this was really expensive, or you know how everything is really overpriced here, or gosh, it's like, you got to rob Peter to pay Paul, and just kind of start noticing how people around you start or how people are talking about money, because that's a really good indicator typically of how you are thinking about money. Because again, our friendships, our relationships end up being a mirror for our own internal mindset as well. And I just think that's kind of like a good, if you're not really quite sure what your money mindset is, just start listening to the people around you. And that will start, I think, opening up some doors for you to start questioning your own thinking around it.
And how you talk about it, like yourself, right? Because it's like when you say something, I can't afford that. It's like all these things where we're just like putting that out there. And on some level, I mean, this is a big, bold statement, but on some level, it's like, if you wanted something bad enough, if they're like what you were tapping into earlier, like you have the money that you actually want to have right now based on decisions and your beliefs around it. Right. So it's like, I mean, this is getting into some kind of sticky territory, but just this idea that like, when you want something bad enough, a lot of times you can figure out what it is. Just even noticing how you frame things and even saying, I can't afford that. It's like, no, you're choosing not to spend your money that way right now,
or you're choosing not to you're choosing not to be resourceful. To find it. And sometimes, you don't have the energy to go out and do it, right?
And that's a choice too.
And that's a choice too. But I think that the underlying thing is abundance is all around you. And so if you can just kind of slow down and take a moment to notice that, to experience that, abundance doesn't change based on how you feel about it or your thoughts that you're thinking about that number in your bank account, for example. Those are just going to be thoughts. The reality is that abundance is everywhere. There's nothing special that some people have money and some people don't. I mean, we're going to put all kinds of things and say, well, no, this happened or that happened or this scenario or that scenario. But those are all of our stories. Those are all of our beliefs. Like, I mean, for every excuse you have, there's a story of somebody who figured it out.
Hello, Oprah.
Exactly. I mean, and we all think there's this something special about her.
Yeah.
But it's not. It was her mindset. You can come up with a million reasons. Well, I can't because I'm a single mom and I don't have any time. I can show you 10 single mothers that figured it out. And I'm not saying that in just a shameful way, but it's just to recognize, like, where are we cutting off our flow?
Yes. And I think, you and I agree that this is so much bigger than just actually like wealth and money. It's like this abundance that you're talking about. It's a mindset about how you look at the universe and the world that you live in general. It's like, we're not encouraging to go become Oprah if you don't give a, about becoming the big billionaire. It's more about what world do you look at? Do you look at the lens of there's not enough?
Yep.
Or do you look at the lens of the universe in your world that says there's more than enough? And if I really wanted to put my focus and my intention and my attention towards something that I want, that I believe that the resources are out there for me.
Yeah, totally. It's about internal abundance.
Yeah.
And I really think about that because oftentimes when we think about abundance, we go external abundance. Money in my bank account, certain amount of cars or houses or wardrobe or whatever. Get more, show more, have more. But to me, that's backwards. Abundance is an internal state. It's a state of trusting. It's a state of allowing. It's a state of receiving. It really is this sort of energy where you feel safe and secure. Like you don't have to grasp. You don't have to be desperate. You don't have to need or to want. It's sort of like trusting that your needs will be met, that there is enough to go around at the table,
Mm-hmm.
that there is a abundance of resources of all different areas. And to me, if we can get to a place where we can feel internal abundance, passion, fulfillment, embodiment, connection, contribution, then that can begin to mirror and show itself externally.
Yeah, because if you think about it, why do we actually even want more money? You know what? Like, seriously, like the reason why you maybe want more money is so that you think it's going to be helping you have more freedom, or it's going to have a better quality of life, or so that you don't have to answer to your husband, or you don't have to, you can spend money the way you want to and buy whatever you want. You think it's because of that, but there's actually a feeling
Yes.
that's connected to the actual why you want more money.
Yeah.
And when you are able to go into that place first, like what you're saying, that it's an inside job, that you actually can, if you can identify what feeling it is that you're wanting because you say you want more money, it's like, then you start actually getting yourself in alignment, and believe it or not, you get a lot more abundance first. And then the financial money, the paper of money, more than likely start showing up.
Well, exactly. I mean, it really is about doing it internal so that it shows up external, versus I got to get this, then it will make me feel good.
Yeah.
That's the backwards part.
Yeah.
And it really, I mean, again, this is the invitation. I think why we're having this conversation is to invite ourselves into a deeper awareness, because when we are asleep to these internal issues, it controls us. The fear runs rampant. We feel stressed all the time. Like you said, we're in jobs we don't enjoy. We sometimes are in relationships we don't want to be in because we feel like we can't get out financially. And so when we have this fear and we hand over this power to money, we are imprisoned. And I think what I love about this conversation today is just opening up a deeper awareness to what are your beliefs around money. Where did they start? How have they developed? Where did you find proof to back up current beliefs about money? Where are your relationships and your friends, just kind of adding fuel to the fire, and just sort of recognizing that all of these are subjective. All of these are thoughts, not facts. And when we can have that awareness, then we can shift it. Then we can realize, oh no, my power is in the present moment. My power is in how I'm thinking about this. My power is in coming back to what would it feel like to be in a state of freedom now, peace now, rather than when the money comes or when this shifts or when this changes. And that's the gift of being aware of your money mindset, because then it really is the invitation to finding peace around all this.
And the beauty of what you're saying is that this is a mindset. So even if you were raised like you were raised, or like I was raised, and you want to change your money story and you want to do it different in the present moment now, the beauty of what you're saying is that really it's all about the mindset around this, and that can be changed right now.
Yes. Well, y'all, we're going to just put a fork in that?
Cork in that.
Pause. Y'all, I never know the sayings. Yeah. We are going to call that an ending, because I think that this is a perfect tee up to our episode next week with our, oh my gosh, so special guest,
yes.
Kate Northrup. Oh
Yay.
my goodness. We are so excited to have a conversation about more money consciousness with her next week. You're going to want to tune in, mark your calendars, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the announcement of that episode. But y'all, thank you for being willing to listen, to have the conversation, to crack open the door just a little bit, just talk about something that we don't like to talk about. This is where it starts. Y'all are so amazing, so brave, courageous to go there with us. And just remember, the purpose of life is to be grateful, to be great, and to be full. We will chat with y'all next week. Bye. If you loved today's episode, make sure to share it with your girlfriends, or heck, post it on your social media channels and invite your circle into this month's topic of money. And if you want to keep the discovery journey going of living more fully alive, check out all my past episodes from the podcast over at maryhyatt.com/show, where you'll also be able to grab the show notes for this episode. Again, that's maryhyatt.com/show. See y'all next week.